Evening, brothers and sisters. On behalf of the Theosophical Society, I am very happy to welcome all of you today for this talk in the Wisdom for Living lecture series. For those of you who are attending these talks for the first time, let me give you a little background information. This series was conceptualized by our international president, Mr. Tim Boyd, who strongly believes that spirituality and daily living have to be interwoven and integrated. And to carry this idea forward, we have these lectures that feature speakers spanning the entire spectrum of human activity, from business, the arts, fitness, ecology, science, spirituality, and so on. The long line of distinguished speakers who have accepted our invitation since this initiative began have been able to give us valuable glimpses of how they have applied spiritual principles to their work and living. As you all might be aware, the Theosophical Society was founded in New York in 1875, and the principal founders were Henry Steele Olcott, a retired colonel in the American Army, and Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, a Russian noblewoman with extraordinary occult powers. It has often been said that while Madame Blavatsky gave the world the wisdom teachings known as Theosophy, Colonel Olcott provided the organization necessary for its transmission to the world. The Adyar campus where we are meeting today is a hallowed place, often referred to as the Flaming Center, and is the international spiritual headquarters of the Theosophical Society. Theosophy believes in the unity of all life, and when we realize this at the deepest level, universal brotherhood, another object of the TS, becomes a living force in our lives. The mission statement of the TS, as approved by its General Council in July 2018, states, and I quote, "To serve humanity by cultivating an ever-deepening understanding and realization of the ageless wisdom, spiritual self-transformation, and the unity of all life." On behalf of the Theosophical Society, I am happy to welcome our speaker for today, Mr. Vivek Sridhar. Mr. Sridhar is a dynamic entrepreneur who has carved a niche for himself in the clean technology sector. His journey began with an undergraduate degree in metallurgy and material science from the National Institute of Technology, Trichy, followed by a master's in renewable energy and management engineering from Stanford University. After completing his education, Vivek ventured into the corporate world and gained valuable experience working with BGR Energy Systems Limited, where he played a pivotal role in the company's solar initiative. Driven by a desire to contribute to the growth of clean technology in India, he joined the Right Choice group of companies. He is currently serving as the CEO of Shiroi Energy. I asked him what Shiroi means and whether it's Japanese, and he said yes. And apparently it means white and pure? White and clean. A very apt name, I thought, for his company. He is currently serving as the CEO of Shiroi Energy, a renewable energy concern founded in 2013 under the Right Choice umbrella, helping to make the company a key player in the solar industry sector. I now invite Mr. Vivek Sridhar to share with us his understanding of this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Geetha. Thank you to Theosophical Society for giving me this opportunity to discuss and share what I've learned about solar over the last decade. And it was wonderful to learn about Theosophical Society and how spirituality and everyday life is similar, and how what we're doing is a part of spiritual growth for everyone. I would also like to thank Mr. Ramkumar. Mr. Ramkumar is Ramkumar uncle for me, is a very close friend of my father for the last 4.5 decades. I've literally seen him while growing up, and it's a pleasure to be talking in front of him today. Thank you everyone for making it here. So I would like to talk a little bit about solar, where we are in terms of the overall energy consumption of the world, and where we are moving towards. What has solar play a role in where we are moving to? What are the current practices in the market? What can we do to make this transition successful? So let me start with the energy consumption. So if you look at it, the world itself is driven by energy. Energy is the key in terms of our modern day life. Our energy sources are very limited. The primary energy sources come from fossil fuels or come from renewable energy sources or nuclear. So there are just 2 or 3 different buckets from which we are deriving our energy. Our modern day life is disconnected from energy production. Everything that we do essentially consumes energy, be it transport, be it any material object that you are using, which comes under manufacturing, and of course electricity, which has now become an invaluable part of our everyday life. So if we look at it, our energy sources, more than 60 to 70% of them still come from fossil fuels. 40% of all energy, when I say energy, this is including thermal energy, which could be used for heating up your milk at home, or it could be used for making steel from iron. Everything, all energy put together, 40% of that is used for electricity, 30% for transport, another 30% for industries. So we have come to a state in our modern life where energy consumption is directly proportional to the prosperity of the country. If you look at advanced nations, they're talking about equivalent of 100,000 kilowatt hour per person. India is still at 7,500. The gap is huge. And you could see the standard of living and the consumption and the material comfort that is evident in the different countries can be broadly correlated to the amount of energy that they consume. The world is today at a stage where we have understood that energy is important, but at the same time, we've also understood that we have to be very cognizant and mindful of where our energy sources come from. With climate change being a major factor, which is no longer in theory, and people certainly living in Chennai have already faced it, and most of the cities have gone through where people have experienced climate change. It is important that we move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. Again, looking at the electricity part of it. Overall, 40% of the energy is used for production of electricity. In that, solar is still around 1%, which means we are probably talking about 0.4 to 0.8% of the overall energy mix coming from solar. So what is this huge conversation about solar? We are barely meeting 1% of the world's requirements in terms of energy. There's this huge halo around solar. People are talking about solar is the next big revolution. Where are we? And why is it that we're talking that solar is something that can really help us? So when we are talking about the transition, there are a few renewable energy sources that we can look at. Hydro is probably the most advanced. It's been around for decades and decades, probably centuries. Tamil Nadu has one of the oldest dams in the world, so we know that hydropower is been present for a long time. But apart from hydro, if you look at the other sources of renewable power, it's wind, which is very site dependent, tidal power, which is its nascent stage of essentially becoming commercial. We have solar, of course, and we have biomass and geothermal. Biomass has always been a moral question where we are looking at how do we grow to essentially consume plants as fuel. Geothermal, again, very, very site dependent. So we are kind of left with solar. Is that the only reason why people are talking about solar? Actually, that's not the case. And for us to transition from our current fossil fuel dependency to a renewable energy future, we require a lot of work. We require more than $2.5 trillion of investment purely in the renewable sector, only in the power sector. Assume that we do that, we still are only at 40% of our overall energy consumption. There is a lot of work to do, and every small bit helps. The reason why solar is so talked about is the potential. Life is because of the sun. And the sun gives us what we need and what we could even dream of requiring. The amount of energy from the sun is roughly 3.85 million exajoules. Overall energy requirement for electricity across the world is roughly 65. You could look at the difference in terms of the energy that we are receiving from the sun and the energy that we are actually consuming. This potential is what is driving people towards talking about solar. What does this translate to? With today's technology, where our efficiency of our solar panels are literally around 20%, we require only 1% of Earth's landmass to be covered with solar panels to take care of all electricity needs of the entire world. 1%. If we keep that in mind, then it seems something that it's doable. This is the potential of solar. How are we going to actually make this a reality? Where are we going towards? What has happened so far? How do we develop solar? What are the current situations and the market forces that are at play is what we will be covering over the next few minutes. Probably 15 years ago when people talked about solar, it was more about potential but very little actual on-ground implementation. Today in 2024, we have quite a bit of implementation which has already happened. We have the projections and the growth for solar are extremely high. Most new plants, power plants which are coming up in the world are solar. The manufacturing capacity for solar panels have manyfold multiplied in the last decade, and it's expected to continue to grow at 10 to 15% year on year. With this in mind, the supply side of solar panels are there. We will need to look at what is the market forces and how do we actually implement it. We've been talking more about the overall global context. What does this mean in the Indian context? In the Indian context, we are very similar in terms of our electricity consumption and the installed capacity of power plants across the country. Coal's around 50 to 55%. Solar is still a very, very small percentage. Again, we are talking about less than 3% of the entire electricity coming from solar. Even though we have the new plants really growing from the solar context, for this to actually start making a reasonable impact is going to take another 5 to 10 years at least. So again, coming down further down into Tamil Nadu, it is similar. Tamil Nadu is one of the better states in terms of the renewable energy usage that we have and the renewable energy portfolio that we have. There is quite a bit of wind in Tamil Nadu. We have around 9,000 to 10,000 megawatt of wind which has been installed, and probably 5,000, 6,000 megawatt of solar that's installed. Our overall requirement for the state, the peak load capacity is around 15,000 megawatt. So it's quite a good number from installed capacity. But I would like to highlight what is installed capacity versus what's the actual energy generation as well, just to give a kind of an idea. Solar produces roughly 5 hours of electricity per day compared to the installed capacity, whereas a coal plant will produce 24 hours of electricity for the installed capacity, which means we will require 5 times the size of solar plant as our requirement to meet just the electricity demand across the entire day. This is not taking into consideration intermittency. It's not taking into consideration how are we going to shift the production from the day to night, all of those other efficiency losses that we will be having. So the task in front of us is huge. It's a mammoth task which we have to work on, not just from, we can't just allow the governments to essentially take the rider and lead and say, okay, this is the policy, this is how we are going to do it. It has to come from a grassroots level. Each person will have to take ownership of the energy that we are using for us to be able to make this transition. All of these facts and figures, from the global numbers to the Indian numbers to the Tamil Nadu numbers, is to essentially reinforce the task at hand. So, in terms of the technology, solar is hands down the best technology for producing power. The reason is, it is very, very, very simple. In fact, I would even go as to say, solar power is like magic. If you take all other forms of electricity, it's essentially either steam or water or some other form of liquid or vapor which runs a turbine which then produces electricity. So we are talking about huge turbines which are 2 times, 3 times the size of the room that we are sitting in. Moving parts, the amount of steel that is required to manufacture that, transporting that from location to location, is a very enormous task. With solar, it's as simple as putting a paper out in sunlight and connecting wires to the end of it, and you produce electricity. This is photovoltaic effect. You're essentially having a P junction and N junction. I don't want to get into physics and bore everyone to sleep. But essentially, we are essentially having semiconductors which, on excitation from light energy, produces electricity which we directly consume. The thickness of a solar panel is actually much, much thinner than a paper. So the technology is advanced enough that we have something very, very simple which is producing electricity, which is something that we require for our modern day life. This magic of solar is one of the reasons why it's being touted as the next energy bullet or silver bullet to solve this fossil fuel addiction that the world has. The technology, again, is very simple. It is small cells connected in series. You have a module, you connect modules together, and you have an array. And arrays together can be put in any number of scale to produce electricity. This is to explain the scalability of solar. It's not possible to have a thermal power plant at our house. A small size thermal power plant just doesn't exist, and it is not viable. Whereas solar is so scalable that you could have it even to power your calculators. Something as small as powering a calculator to something as large as powering a nation. This scalable size of solar is what makes it attractive. So reiterating the major advantages of solar, if you really look at it, is the potential. We have enough power from the sun to take care of all our needs. The technology is the simplest. You're just putting it out in the sun, making sure sunlight falls on it, and you're getting power. And it is very scalable. These are the three major factors which determine why the world is talking about solar. Now we've done enough talking. Let's understand how it actually operates. Very simple. We have solar panels on top. It is producing DC power. We convert that to AC with an inverter, and we consume power at our homes. This is one of the simplest forms of solar. A simple rooftop solution. With something as simple as this, it's then left to us to make sure that people know that this technology is available. Today we are fighting against biases for solar. Because solar is new, at least presumed to be new, people always think there is a technology risk to it. But solar panels have been around since 1980s. Solar is picked up from 2004, so we have plants which have been in operation for 20 years and which are producing very well. Second, solar has always had this costly tag. People always assume that solar is expensive. That was the case 15 years ago. Not the case anymore. So with all of this, we need to then get into understanding what are the different types of solar systems that are there and what makes sense for who. Solar is versatile. You could do solar which is connected to the grid. You could do a solar which is completely off-grid, and you can do something in between. That's on-grid, off-grid, and hybrid for you. Off-grid is you could have a cabin in the woods. A dream for a lot of people, completely self-sufficient. You sit there by yourself. You have a cabin in the woods. You have your basic requirements met with solar and battery. This is off-grid. On-grid is for people in the cities. We are anyway connected to the grid, and we want to have power 24/7. At the same time, we already have a source of power. And then it is economics. How much do I pay the grid? What is the cost of solar? Solar on-grid is the cheapest in terms of the different types of systems, because you're using the grid as a battery. So you produce power, you consume it, and if you have excess, you send it back to the grid. If your consumption is more than your production, then you draw from the grid. It is as simple as that. A hybrid is something that we are doing where it is kind of like a combination of both. You want to have the cheapest form, at the same time you want to have backup in terms of a rainy day, or or when we have floods in Chennai. So 2-3 days of no power, we can't live without it, so we need to have backup. So that's essentially hybrid for you. So these are the three different types of solar systems. Just going over the advantages and disadvantages. When you have battery, your price is going to increase around 1.5 to 2 times. So anything which has battery, which is off-grid or hybrid, your cost is going to be higher. You're going to have a little bit of maintenance on the battery. But otherwise, it is a robust system and it gives you backup. So it's a trade-off that we can really look at to understand what is it that suits our requirement. After all of this, solar today is the cheapest form of power. The scale that we have achieved in solar in the last 20 years is phenomenal. Today, you could produce solar power economically and sell it to the central government at 2.5 rupees per unit or 2.5 rupees per kilowatt hour, which is much, much, much lower than what we are paying for today. Our retail prices for commercial are probably in the range of 10 rupees per kilowatt hour. So there is a 400% difference between the cost of production and the cost of retail. With solar being the cheapest form of power, it's now up to us to really spread it. Another major advantage because of the magic of solar is that it has no moving parts. When you have moving parts, you have wear and tear. When you have wear and tear, you have a higher maintenance. With solar, the panels come with a 25-year warranty, literally 25 years, which is half a generation at least. And they have no moving parts. All that we need to do for maintenance is clean it up. So it's now proven we're not the first movers anymore, we are not taking a technology risk, and it's the cheapest form of power. Therefore, it's a great investment opportunity. Whether it's an investment for our own houses, or if we don't have the luxury of doing that, is to invest into projects which are done elsewhere. So let's get into the meat of it. What is it that are the current policies? So from a pure theory perspective, solar is great. Now it's purely about policies and implementation which determine the rules and regulations of the particular places, which will then determine what is the market uptake of it. So there are three major policies that we should understand about solar. So this is the gross metering or net metering. Then of course everybody talks about subsidies when it's solar. And then we have the open access. So what is a gross meter? So this is the policy which is available in Tamil Nadu for non-residential consumers who are using rooftop solar. Whenever you put up a solar rooftop on your roof, you can connect it to the EB meter, and the meter will take in readings of what is it that you're exporting and what is it that you're importing. Whatever whatever number of kilowatt hours that you're exporting to the grid, you will be repaid by the grid at a particular tariff. In Tamil Nadu, that's around 3.3 rupees per kilowatt hour. Whatever you consume from the grid, you will be charged at a different tariff. That depends on whether you're a commercial user, an institutional user, or an educational user, but industrial user, it ranges between 7 rupees to 10 rupees per kilowatt hour. You could see that this is not the best of policies, but the policy certainly is good enough for a reasonable investment. So what we are seeing the governments typically do is they understand the price of solar and what is the levelized cost of electricity from solar, and then based on it frame the policy so that it's profitable for us to invest in it. At the same time, it's not game-changingly profitable that there is going to be a huge number of people going towards it. This has kind of been like a cat and mouse race with the government changing policies every 3 to 4 years as solar prices keep going down. Whether this is right or wrong, I will let the crowd decide. But this is the policies that are there, and it is something that we should be aware of. Of course, the easier part of the same policy will be net meter, which is available for residential consumers in the state and in most parts of India as well, which is essentially whatever you consume minus whatever you export minus what you import is what you get billed for. So it is equivalent to saying that the grid is paying you the same tariff as what you are paying the grid. This, of course, makes it a lot more economical. The reason why we need this for residences is because India has a tiered tariff system. We have free power for agriculture. We have partly subsidized power for residential. And this subsidy comes from all of the other consumers who are industries, institutions, and commercial. So when we have this tiered tariff, it is not residential, then it becomes slightly unviable to do solar. And therefore, they have this net metering policy for residences, but for all other consumers, you still have gross metering. This is kind of, the policies are similar across most states in India, and it has spurred investment into solar, but whether it is enough to spur the investment and the speed at which we require the investments to come in to ensure that we have a good transition to a clean energy grid is a question that is really needs to be answered. Another good thing about residential is that we have a bit of subsidies, because we have the cost of solar for residential and our levelized cost is kind of equal to the price that we are paying to the grid right now. Therefore, subsidies have been announced for up to 3 kilowatt in size. 3 kilowatt is reasonable for a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom kind of an apartment where we are not really using a lot of power. Maybe using our air conditioners for 1 or 2 air conditioners for 4 or 5 hours a day. That's the kind of system size that you will require a 3 kilowatt system. Right? So in terms of policy, we have the gross meter, we have the net meter, and we have the subsidies. This is all good for all the small players, which is essentially putting it up on your rooftop. But the applications for solar is plentiful. What about industries? Industries consume much more power than what their roof space can generate. What about institutions? What about commercial buildings? What about high-rise buildings? Right? So there are a lot of applications. We literally can put up a solar panel of any size in any location. And it is only just the number of panels that determine how much power that is being generated. So for this, what we have is called an open access policy. So industries, large industries and large consumers can buy power from a solar plant located elsewhere within the state. So we generate power in a plant in a remote location, just like how you generate wind power, and then you feed that power into the grid. You pay the grid wheeling and transmission charges for delivering your power from there to here, and then they will reduce that in your bill month on month. This policy has been good and has generated a lot of investment and a lot of scale for solar. Industries are economically conscious and they are moving towards having green power as part of their ESG norms. So they are willing to buy solar power at cheaper prices. And the amount and quantum of power that one industry requires is much higher than what a residence will typically require. To just give you a sense of the scale, a factory like a large car manufacturing factory in Chennai is probably going to require around 150 to 200 megawatt of solar. That is 2 lakh kilowatt of solar. And we talked about a house which could do away with 1 to 3 kilowatt. So we could literally power 2 lakh houses with the same amount of power that one factory requires. Having a very good policy for this has led people to invest a lot in larger scale projects. Of course, everything has its pluses and minuses. So if you have the good policy, the other side of it is land degradation. We degrade a lot of land to put up solar. For 1 megawatt of solar, we require 4 to 5 acres of land. So for one factory, you're literally taking up 800 to 1,000 acres of land to supply power to one factory. Probably not scalable. All said and done, in the overall scheme of things, we are still less than the 1% land area that we require. But there is a good solution to this. The built-up area that we have as a country and as a society, a human society in the world, is around 2%. The 2% of land area is covered with buildings. We have already degraded that land. So if there is one takeaway from this talk that I really want people to think about is, if you see a building, you should think there should be solar on top of it. If we are able to achieve that, we will literally take care of 80 to 90% of our power requirements. If there is a building, there has to be solar. That's as simple as what we need to achieve, but as complex as to achieve that as well. So what can we do? First, of course, is to educate ourselves. We understand what solar is. We know it's a technology which has been there for a while. We know it's a technology which has been proven. We know it's the cheapest form of power. We know it is scalable. With this, we are better than 70-80% of the population, just by knowing this. Of course, the next step would be to install panels, either on our own place or wherever we can put it up. India is an interesting society. The developed nations typically are a suburban kind of a model, where the upper middle class, or the people who have the spending power, typically live in large bungalows or villas a little outside the city. In India, it's kind of like the reverse. The upper middle class lives in high rises within the city. So the spending power and the space to put them are kind of don't come together here. But of course, taking up advocacy to at least get everybody in our society, in our apartment complex, to come together and put up solar is something that we have to take the effort to. It's a moral responsibility for us to ensure that we have a good transition. There will always be cases where the space is not right, there's too much shade, does it make sense to put solar, and all of it. There are enough platforms today where you can invest in solar. Instead of putting and parking our money in fixed deposits or in putting it in the stock market, which has quite a bit of fossil fuel based companies which dominate it, it makes sense to ensure that our money is going towards the right cause. We can do all the talking that we want, but if you put your money where your mouth is, people stand up. The good thing about that is that we have this opportunity to do it across the world. There are a lot of platforms which focus on Africa, which focus on India, which focus on Europe, and places where we can put in $1, we will be getting better than FD rates or even better than our stock market rates. At the same time, we can be sure that our money is gone towards something good. This is something that is not widely known, but it is something that if we take it upon ourselves to kind of spread the message, I'm sure that a lot more people will take interest in doing it. Altogether, at the end of it, given the scalability and the distributionness of solar, I really feel that it has to be a grassroots movement, which is why we call solar a revolution, and it's not like a industry going through a change. Solar has to come from the people. There is a lot of information there. There is a lot of misinformation there. How do we get the right information to the right person at the right time is essentially what will decide the fate of scale of solar. So just to kind of summarize again and give you a bit of takeaways, solar has the potential to ensure that we have power, energy for all our requirements multifold. We require less than 1% of the land area, which we have already degraded, to ensure that we achieve all of these electricity requirements from ourselves. Today, solar is the cheapest form of power, hands down, especially in a tropical country like ours. Even in a country or countries in Europe which are little further up the equator, they are still probably the first or second in terms of the cost effectiveness of electricity being generated. It's a very, very, very proven technology. This has been around for a while. It is as simple as putting pure form of silicon, which is there in all our chips, out in the sun, and it will produce electricity. On the whole, it's a good investment. If it's a good investment, it is only awareness that needs to be spread, so people start moving towards it. So there's a little bit of a gist about solar. I would really appreciate if people will, if there are any questions that you would like to ask, I'm happy to clarify them and give a little more in terms of topics maybe that I have not covered in depth.
You were saying that you need about 3 kilowatt of power for a 2-bedroom apartment or something. How much does it cost per watt as a thumb rule calculation?
So on the smaller scale, a kilowatt will cost roughly about 50,000 to 60,000 rupees. On the large scale, that will go down to 30 to 40,000 rupees per kilowatt. So a 3 kilowatt will be roughly around 1.8 lakhs. And we have a subsidy of around 70 to 75,000 from the government. So essentially a lakh, and you're talking about free power for a small house for the next 25 years. No, this is an on-grid system where that's the cost for an on-grid. If it's an off-grid for a 3 kilowatt with a reasonable size of battery, you're talking about close to 2.5 to 3 lakhs.
What is the area the solar cells will occupy for, assuming 1 kilowatt?
Yes. For 1 kilowatt of power, we will require roughly 80 to 100 square feet of space. This includes space for walking around, for maintenance and cleaning panels as well. Solar is at 20 to 22%. 22% is the maximum efficiency that we have in our panels. And at 22% efficiency, we need 1% of land. So of all the sunlight and all the energy that hits the panel, only 22% of it gets converted to electricity. And we are already at these numbers at this efficiency. So the potential, I reiterate, is very, very high. Yes, please.
What about the technology of solar chimneys instead of panels?
Okay. So I have covered more about the electricity part of it. There is this huge solar thermal side of things, which I have not touched here. Solar thermal is for essentially heating. Anything where we are concentrating solar power to heat, be it water heaters, be it concentrated solar power, be it any other types of heating requirement that we have, could even be. There our conversion or efficiency in terms of conversion is around 60 to 70% because it's very easily doable. If you take a bucket of water, you put it out there, is the concept of a solar water heater. We just try to do it a little more efficiently. If there is a heating requirement in a tropical country, then it really makes a lot of sense. In terms of heat, solar thermal, the issue is the location again. If you're in a place where there's a long winter, the production during those months are usually very low.
So at that time, you need to switch back to the grid. So you can't completely be off grid.
Correct. Yes, so if you look at it from a global perspective, can we be 100% solar is a question that if we ask. I would say today that's not the case. But there is a lot of research that's been done. One of my professors at Stanford, Dr. Mark Jacobson, has come out with a very, very interesting paper where he talks about WWS. It's wind, water, and solar. We have an interconnected grid, typically in most places, and with wind, water, and solar, we will be able to meet 100% of our requirements with very minimal storage. This is a research that's been done for most geographies. They've taken up research for a US, a state, a county, a city. Similarly for a country like India and a state like Tamil Nadu. So there's a very detailed kind of a breakup as to what is the capacity of wind that we require, water that we require, or essentially hydro that we require, and solar that we require. In this, water works as storage. Your hydro plants typically allow water to flow from the dam through the channel, turn the turbine, produce electricity, and flow through. What is now available as a technology and which has been implemented in a few places in India and a lot of places in Europe is what's called pumped hydro. So you allow the water to flow down, it turns the turbine, and then you collect it again. And you can pump this back to the dam. So when the sun is shining and you have a lot of power being produced at 11 a.m. or 2 p.m. in the afternoon, our grid typically will not be able to take that load. This extra energy is just used to pump this water back up and let it flow down in the evening. So this is a very simple mechanism for storage, and this is one of the cheapest storage mechanisms that we have so far. Batteries being much more expensive, you have a lot of different technologies that are being researched, but pumped hydro has been the cheapest in terms of storage so far. Yes, yes, please.
We are talking in terms of its ecological benefits. I understand that, for example, compared to coal, there is no doubt.
Yes.
But if we were talking in a larger picture, let's say we take on account the production of the solar cells, the lithium batteries or whatever it is, the extraction of these materials from a country in Africa producing, bringing, if we were looking really from the A to Z, can we put in the picture sincerely how ecologically are we becoming? Because if suddenly, I'm just wondering, this would become a massive thing where everybody crazily invests. Is there any kind of policy to have a diversity of ways of producing these cells? You are talking about a silicon cell. Is there a way of having a, let's say, less term lasting thing that could be biodegradable for once? And can we really get 100% ecological solution, or at what degree of ecologically we are talking about?
So let me answer that. There are 2 to 3 parts to that question. I will answer that in parts. So what is the first part of the question is, what is the carbon payback of a solar plant that we put out today? With the current grid that we have, in India being one of the more dirtier grids, where we have around 750 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour being produced, our carbon payback of a solar panel being installed in this grid is roughly to 2 to 2.5 years. This is A to Z, from mining of silicon to production of panels, to shipping of panels, to installation of the solar plant. The entire carbon along the chain, compared to how much carbon it will offset over the next 2 to 2.5 years, will be sufficient for the production of it. This is point number 1. This is today. What about tomorrow when there is more solar in the grid? So if you really look at it, we have to do what is called like a reverse inflation of sorts. Our carbon intensity is high today, and carbon offset tomorrow is going to be less effective than carbon offset today. The rate at which we are going towards the grid in terms of our transition today, if you take a 6% deflation number, so 100 grams of carbon today is worth only 94 grams of carbon tomorrow or 1 year from now, is a good number to have in mind when you're doing our overall carbon calculations. So I'm talking only about a 6% number. So our 2 years is going to become 2.01 years or 2.02 years in terms of our payback tomorrow or 1 year from now. As we move towards more and more solar and more renewables, yes, this number is going to get longer in terms of our in terms of the payback period. But say 10 years, 15 years from now, where we have a high percentage of renewable penetration, at that point, what we are really looking at is offsets. We will be shutting down a coal plant for a solar plant. That way, the offset or removal of that entire system is going to be very different. Today, most of the renewables that's being put into the grid is for the growth of demand. our overall energy demand is growing up by 10 to 15%. In India, we are at 12% average for the last 25 years. With that in mind, all of the new capacity addition that we are doing is more for what we need more tomorrow rather than replacement. At a stage where we are at high renewable penetration, it will be kind of replacement of those panels, a replacement of fossil fuel plants. And therefore, we will have to look at it from a different lens, because at that point, we will need to compare apples to apples. We will need to compare what is the carbon intensity of setting up a coal plant versus the carbon intensity of setting up a renewable energy plant. And in that, again, renewables win hands down. This answers your first part of the question. I missed the second part. You had also asked something else. Sorry.
Yes, I was asking about if there was a diverse way of producing these cells, these materials.
Yes.
So we are not depending on, again, extracting from an African country and then having something which is not disposal. We will produce new rubbish, new technological rubbish, which has 25 years, and then we throw again. Are we looking at a real green, closed circle possibility and diversified? So maybe, as you were saying, like with a paper, we could produce this. Could this be real? Could this be something that could be 100%, or is any search towards this?
Yes. So I will answer that in two parts. Again, one is the circular loop of what do we do with end-of-life solar plants, and the second is what is the research, what are the new types of cells that we're looking at. In terms of the circular loop of solar plants, you're essentially talking about end of 25th year, you're still producing 80% of the power that you're producing on day one. So your plant is not essentially scrap. It still continues to produce power that we still will be a commodity at that point in time in which we can still use. So it does not have to be shut down. Yes, the electronics or the inverters may need to be changed, but not the panels themselves. But that does not answer the question of what happens to the damaged plants, the damaged solar panels. There is a lot of damage. 100 megawatt plant is probably going to produce even up to 50 to 100 panels, damaged panels every day. And this number is going to increase going on as we have more solar plants installed. Because the solar cell itself is very, very thin, by weight, 98% of the material in a solar panel is completely recyclable. A solar panel is made of silicon. It has silver. Then you have essentially a cable, a junction box to take wires out of it, which is made of copper and plastic. You have glass on both sides. And that's about it. And you have an aluminum frame. Everything except the solar silicon is easily extractable and recyclable. The aluminum, we already have a process for recycling it. The glass, we already have a process for recycling it. The silver can be melted pretty easily and be taken out. So it's only the figuring out how do we recycle this contaminated silicon a little bit, which is still a question. And this is 2% of the question. So we are still, in terms of a circular loop, we are pretty good there. What are the alternatives to silicon? Silicon is the most mined material in humanity because it's used in glass, it's used in almost a lot of other applications. This is not lithium. Lithium is what's mined in Africa where we require it for our batteries. And it has very little rare earth materials which have very few mines. Is not the case in solar panels, in pure crystalline silicon solar panels. There are multiple technologies that are being researched right now. So there was thin film, which had cadmium telluride, you have gallium arsenide, a bunch of those other semiconductors, layers of which were being researched and which were a commercial technology in 2011-12. But because of the price drop of silicon, as silicon scaled, these technologies have been thrown out of the window. The technology that can throw silicon out of the window is organic cells. Organic cells are essentially carbon-based. That's the reason why they're called organic. And therefore, they will have a better ecological perspective to them, because everything in nature typically is made of carbon. How much of that can be biodegradable in terms of the organic cell is a question that we will have to really look at answering. But the organic cells are essentially like your plastic. It's very, very thin, very flexible, but the life and the production are much lower. For large-scale plants, silicon still might make sense, but my assumption and what I'm seeing is that the smaller usage in terms of solar cells to charge your cell phone, solar cells to charge your batteries, organic cells will make a breakthrough there. And that can slowly build up the technology to a point where it could compete with silicon, but it's a while away, 5 to 10 years away, in my opinion. Yes, please.
Do we have solar power batteries for the phone, mobile phone?
Yes, it's as I said, solar is very scalable. A single cell connected to a battery pack can charge your battery. There are enough battery banks which have solar panels on top of it, which is even available on Amazon. You could just search for a solar cell phone charger. You will be able to find it there.
And one more is for residential use, you have inverters.
Great.
For electrical, backups. Similarly, do you have solar inverters backup?
Which is the hybrid system that I've talked
Hybrid
about.
system.
Essentially, you will have a hybrid system, will have batteries. It could be the same batteries that you use in your inverters today, which is lead acid, or you could have lithium-ion batteries connected to a solar system which could take care of your backup.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
This is my first lesson, actually.
Yes.
So the cleaning routine, right? Okay, so protocol, how labor intensive is it? Because
Yes.
nowadays labor cost also is very high, right? Okay, if you have to clean it 3 times a month,
Okay.
it will cost 2,400 rupees.
It depends on where you're located. If you're located in a reasonably rural location, I would even suggest once a month is more than sufficient. And during the rainy months, you will need not clean the panels. So you're talking about 2-3 months of not cleaning it as well. The routine purely depends on where we are located and what is the kind of dust that we have. Yes, it's labor intensive, but it is, instead of looking at it as an additional labor that we hire to only clean the panels, for a smaller system, I would suggest this as either a typical domestic help supporting you with it, or a watchman supporting you with it, or we take it up on ourselves, best case scenario, and do it as an exercise. In the large scale plant, I would suggest that there are a lot of robots that are coming into play. These robots are now waterless as well, or water free, except for the really hard kind of like stains that we need to remove, bird droppings, etc. You will be able to take care of your typical dust with pure robots. Won't make economic sense in residential, but in large scale, yes, it will make sense.
So basically what Fatima
Yes.
was talking about is product stewardship, where the producer takes responsibility when the product that he has manufactured reaches the end of its useful life. So I think there you're saying that except for the
Silicon itself, yes. So if you look from the silicon perspective, most of our chips, the electronic chips, have a bit of an issue in terms of recycling, but there are ways and there are processes to do it. We will have to come up with a similar mechanism to kind of recycle the silicon here. In terms of the manufacturer taking up responsibility, there is an organization called PV Cycle, which is championing the recycling of PV panels, and most of the major manufacturers are part of it. How much of that will get enforced is a question, but you could get a solar panel where the manufacturer will guarantee that they will take your panel back at end of life and make sure it's recycled. Little more expensive, but yes, it is available in the market.
often recycling and downcycling.
Yes,
So it's not, you don't really get back to original quality.
correct.
It finally ends up in the land.
Yes, I agree to you with an extent. The percentage that goes to the landfill is something that can be reduced. If you look at how silicon wafers are manufactured or silicon ingots are manufactured, the purity of silicon ingots are essentially what's called like a moving rod which does heating, and it will make the particular places that it goes to as more pure. The end of it will be a little impure and they will cut it off and throw it, even today towards manufacturing. So we could do the same provided that we are able to make our solar cells back into ingots. We will be able to get high quality, reasonable pure silicon and have a little bit of waste that will still need to go out. The good thing, another good thing is solar cells are much more purer than the purity requirement for chips. So there is a, I'm not sure about this, but I would still assume that a particular reject of solar cells can go into manufacturing of chips.
Hi,
Yes,
sir.
please. Hi.
I completed my undergraduate in sustainable energy management. So I have a small question.
Yes, please.
Where we live in a coastal area, so it is difficult to maintain a solar panel because it will corrode. This is what I learned in all the articles. So do you have any other solutions for it to avoid the corrosion?
What corrodes?
Uh,
Corrosion
the-
is the
no,
metal.
No. The mounting stand corrodes.
Correct. It is the mounting stand that will corrode. The panel itself is just glass and silicon which is sealed and has an aluminum frame. So it is the mounting structure that's going to get corroded. Just like you're cleaning your panels, maintenance for everything is important. I'm pretty sure people living in Besant Nagar know how much their taps corrode. But there are still people living right next to the beach. It's how do we maintain that which is important. And this is a well-known maintenance because it's maintenance of metal. It's not something that is new or specific to solar. What we will need to do is essentially paint every 2 to 3 years. Either you have that spray paint with the zinc coating that can be done, or you essentially just do another coat of paint for your mounting structures. Yes, please.
Again, in the same line of the closed cycle and continuing the question of Geetha Jaikumar, has there been a really very careful study, because we are talking about the recycling of these materials, which requires a lot of energy itself. So, if we would really put together the energy of extracting, mounting, plus maybe the maintenance, plus the recycling of this, and the energy that the whole thing will give, is there any really, really serious study? Because the problem is that, as you were saying, this big company gets in charge of these things. It's funny because it's normally these big lobby petrol companies that promote the anti-plastic thing, so they are sure that all the solutions remain inside the thing, so nothing gets done. You know, is this big lie lobby that we are living? Sorry, I'm just putting it out because it's the big joke about these renewable energies, which are in one hand they give you, in the other hand they keep the thing to be sure the lobby goes on. So I just wanted to know if there is a really serious, independent kind of lines in which seriously all these quantities of energies and the carbon footprint in the big number are put there. I'm just saying this because it's been 4 years that I've been following these things of the energy, and for example, Tesla, many years ago, along with Edison, brought another technology that in the moment, the big lobbies, as you know, electrical says, hey, no, this independent thing, this free energy, what is this about? We want something we can count, we can charge everybody for, but energy is free, actually. There are so many patents in regards of water motors, which have been again bought by a petrol company and put under a box to be sure that they are not implemented. So before, I am just saying this because I'm very seriously concerned and very, very seriously interested on what are the alternatives we do have now. No?
Okay.
Thank
So I will again answer this in parts. The first part, of course, is the free energy concept, where we are talking about a few concepts that were maybe developed, may not be developed, but has never seen the light of day, and it has essentially been killed. There is a moral question that we really need to ask ourselves. If there is free energy, are humans and human society capable of handling it, if they have access to it? If you really take the per capita consumption, I talked about 7,000 kilowatt hour per person in India, 30,000 in China, probably 90,000 to 95,000 kilowatt hour per person in the US. You take the Middle East, it is 200,000. Begs the question, are we capable of handling free energy? Is this the right direction that we should go into or not? So that's a different question altogether, but it's a pertinent question because when we are talking about, okay, is this a technology that's been killed out? It's also a question, are the masses ready to accept that technology? In terms of the recycling of the solar system itself, is there another technology that has been already invented and not been let out of the box? Just because these companies would like to produce more and more panels, my answer to that is a little bit of skepticism. The reason is, today, if I want to buy solar panels for a large project in India, my delivery times is 1.5 to 2 months. Typically, corporates are very simple-minded. They are purely minded about money. And they're purely minded about what is the cost at which they're selling it. If we assume that to be true, then we do not have the scale of manufacturing to meet the demand today. So the effort and the focus for them is, how do I scale up quickly, therefore I make more money, rather than think about a problem that could or could not happen 10, 15 years down the line. There are certainly independent researchers who are working on recycling, who are already started from various universities as soon as the solar boom started happening in 2009, 2010. The reason is, the good thing about the solar boom is that it was started by Europe. And Europe has been, in my opinion, a front runner in essentially trying to be a moral leader in terms of converting and moving towards a green and responsible transition. So when the technology and the implementation has mainly started and bloomed in Europe, it's very unlikely that you're going to suppress recycling technology at this stage of where the technology is. So that's my 2 points there. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone. Yes.
Thank you for that very illuminating presentation. Many of our doubts were clarified, and you gave us a lot of information which we can ponder over. And many of you might have questions still. So since the time is up, you can probably, after the meeting is over, you can approach Mr. Vivek Sridhar and continue your debate with him. Thank you very much.